The following episode contains graphic discussions about a criminal case. Viewer discretion advised. Today on an all-new Dr. Phil. Outrageous sentences?
This is a kid who left her for garbage, and 6 months for that harm is ridiculous.
A judge defends Brock Turner's time.
The sentence he imposed was absolutely appropriate.
Plus,
a former judge who gave 0 jail time to a man who assaulted a helpless female.
If I had it to do all over again, my decision would be the same.
It is outrageous given the nature of the crime. Today's going to be a changing day in your life. You've never had anybody working harder to bring you to the threshold of change than right now. They are upheld as the most revered moral arbiters in our society, sentencing people to jail, to prison, sometimes even to death. They swear solemn oaths to administer blind justice regardless of color, creed, race, or health. So help them God. I'm talking about judges. But with more and more reports of rapists walking free, victims claiming they are the ones serving life sentences, and judges being run out of court by the people who voted them in, I just decided it was time to take a closer look at our justice system.
A man accused of trying to rape a student at the University of Florida released from jail. The reason the judge did it has people outraged.
A judge releasing him on a no-cost bail because of his school obligations, and at the time, a hurricane was coming.
Now the outrage from people all across the country after a doctor was convicted of raping a patient and then sentenced only to probation.
A former bus driver who admitted to raping a 14-year-old girl won't get prison time.
Nothing in recent memory has touched a nerve here at Stanford quite like the Brock Turner case.
The victim in the Stanford rape case has revealed who she is. Her name is Chanel Miller. It was in 2015 that Miller's case made headlines when she was raped by Stanford student Brock Turner.
Brock Turner was sentenced to roughly 6 months in the county jail, but will almost certainly be released after serving just 3 months.
I think everyone would probably agree that the way that this case was handled was just an injustice.
The judge, you believe, extended empathy to him and sentenced him to 6 months. What do you think should have been the fair sentence?
I think it should have been proportional to the harm. I also know that there are young men of color serving far longer sentences for nonviolent crimes.
Did you have a number in mind or a sentencing in mind? Did you?
At least 1 year. We had spent 18 months just getting to that point, just for it to go to 3 months.
The Santa Clara County Superior Court judge was recalled by voters when he sentenced Brock Turner. Judge Aaron Persky is only the 4th judge in California history to be recalled by voters and the first in some 86 years.
Well, hands down, this was one of the most controversial decisions of its kind, that concerning Brock Turner, the Stanford athlete convicted of sexually assaulting Chanel Miller and leaving her unconscious behind a dumpster. Now, this case was so controversial, it wasn't just the defendant on trial. The judge, Michael Aaron Persky, was on trial too. And one woman, a former Superior Court judge herself, is, despite a staggering national outcry, standing by him. Take a look.
I do feel that an injustice has been done to Brock Turner. I think what Judge Persky did was absolutely appropriate. The judge imposed a sentence by following the recommendation made by the probation officer. The judge followed the recommendation of a moderate sentence and imposed a 6-month jail sentence. He also did a lot more. He imposed a fine. He required Brock Turner to undergo anger management classes, and he required Brock Turner to register as a sex offender for the rest of his life. This young man wears a scarlet letter for the rest of his life. That's anything but lenient. I believe the sentence was absolutely appropriate. I would absolutely have done the same thing if I had presided over that case. Judge Persky has been on the bench for 14 years, and not once has he ever been found to have engaged in bias or misconduct. Please vote no on the recall of Judge Persky. I opposed the recall because I believe Judge Aaron Persky was unfairly targeted, and secondly, because this recall was a real threat to the independence of the judiciary. Why have we lost this whole concern that we should have as a society for redemption? I've heard people say that those who have been convicted of murder, who go to prison, get out, they have a right now to redeem themselves. But I haven't heard that for Brock Turner.
Well, please welcome retired Superior Court Judge Cordell and former District Attorney Michael Crowd, who believes that the Brock Turner sentencing was an outrage. Now, joining us live from Boston via satellite is former prosecutor and law lecturer Wendy Murphy. So, Wendy, thank you as well. Guys, thanks for being here. Why do you say this was a reasonable sentence and penalty for this young man?
I say it's reasonable because judges have to take into consideration a number of factors. That is the victim, the defendant, the circumstances of the crime. I believe that the sentence he imposed was absolutely appropriate, and he isn't the only one. In California, when you're convicted of a felony, the probation department is required to prepare a report, to look at the entire offense, and to recommend a sentence.
But it is just a recommendation.
Absolutely.
The decision is with the judge.
You're right. This was a probation recommendation for a moderate jail sentence, which the judge chose to follow. And I think it was appropriate.
Well, here was the sentence. He was convicted of assault with intent to rape an intoxicated woman, sexually penetrating an intoxicated woman with a foreign object, sexually penetrating an unconscious person. And the sentence was 6 months in county jail, 3 years probation, lifetime on the sex offender registry, mandatory sex offender rehabilitation. Now, he could have gotten 3, 6, or 8 years under the law, correct, Michael?
That's correct.
Why not? Why not give him more than 6 months in jail, which is going to be with good time 3 months, so in 12 weeks, he's out?
What we have here is a case in which he left her unconscious after sexually assaulting her, and the only reason this individual is being treated differently is because he's white and he's from Stanford. There's no other clear-cut reason.
See, that's just not true, and that's not based on fact.
Wendy, respond to this, if you will. He got certainly a moderate or light sentence compared to what is available under the law, but yet he was assigned a third-degree category on the sex offender registry, which is severe.
It's an important observation. You cannot have it both ways. This was either a severe crime, which is why he's a level 3, or it was equivalent of shoplifting, which is why he got 3 months. When you are the judge, you uphold the Constitution first. You do equal justice under the law. You make sure the punishment fits the crime. He didn't do any of those things in this case. When you rape and brutalize in a sexual way a completely defenseless, unconscious woman, when you give that guy a slap on the wrist, you have declared yourself unfit to serve on the bench.
Brock Turner was very clearly treated differently. He was a star athlete than anybody else. Anybody else under these circumstances. This wasn't people get on a second
say that.
On a second time DUI, people get 6 months.
You have never done a survey of how defendants are treated. And by the way, and you know in sentencing, you know very well, each case is different.
I've lived in the criminal justice system.
As have I.
For 15 years as a prosecutor, now 11 years as a defense attorney. For 26 years, I have never seen anything like this before. This isn't a kid who went shoplifting. This isn't a kid who stole someone's car in the neighborhood. This is a kid who violated a human being, left her for garbage on the side next to a dumpster or in an alley, whichever one you want to deal with, and harmed her for good. And 6 months for that harm is ridiculous.
You know, I'm not trying to trivialize at all the crimes of which Brock Turner was convicted. Not at all. What I'm trying to get people to understand is that this isn't a system where victims get to decide what happens to defendants.
Okay, up next, we're going to meet a former judge who, like Aaron Persky, lost his livelihood when he gave 0 jail time to a man who strangled a helpless female. We'll be right back.
34-year-old Justin Schneider strangled a woman until she was unconscious.
The no jail time arrangement sparked anger and cost the presiding judge his seat on the bench.
I absolutely did my job by following the law of the state of Alaska. If I had it to do all over again, my decision would be the same.
A group of Alaska residents are trying to take a judge off the bench after a controversial sentence. 34-year-old Justin Schneider strangled a woman until she was unconscious and then masturbated on her. Schneider accepted a plea deal last week, which includes no additional jail time. It also credited him for the year he spent at home with an ankle monitor while the case was pending.
The no jail time arrangement sparked anger and outrage across the nation and cost the presiding judge his seat on the bench.
Well, today we're talking about really disturbing crimes with lenient sentences that have the public outraged. Now, the judge you just saw in that tape piece lost his seat after giving 0 jail time to a man who strangled and assaulted a woman. That judge is here today. Take a look.
My name is Michael Corey. I presided over the case that involved Justin Schneider. What far too many people didn't understand is that his conduct with respect to that victim in the state of Alaska was not considered a sexual assault because what he did not constitute sexual contact. Mr. Schneider ejaculated on the defendant. I absolutely did my job by following the law of the state of Alaska. One needs to understand that this was not an open sentencing. This was a plea bargain. This sentence was not my idea. I knew that this didn't feel right. I really felt like I was strapped to a locomotive going off a cliff. I had to follow the law. Mr. Schneider was sentenced to 2 years, the maximum sentence that he could receive for that offense. One of those years was suspended. The other year, he had effectively already served on ankle monitoring. Consequently, he walked out of the courtroom a free man, much to the chagrin of everyone, including myself. The majority of the voters in Alaska decided that I would not be retained for another term, and so I stepped away. If I had it to do all over again, my decision would be the same.
Okay, please welcome retired Superior Court Judge Michael Corey. Thank you so much for being here. You met Michael and Judge Cordell. Wendy Murphy is with us via satellite, and she'll be weighing in. Judge, you said that you wished that you could have done more, but that you couldn't.
Well, the law didn't allow it. It was a B felony. B felonies are punishable by 0 to 10 years. Mr. Schneider had no prior felonies, so he was presumptive 0 to 2 years. And without the state pursuing aggravators, there was no way to go above the 2 years.
So based on the nature of the offender and the offense, there's a cap to what the court is allowed to give. So you didn't have the option to give this person 10 years.
Exactly.
Now, also, in your defense, and people don't understand, what he did, he ejaculated on her, that is not considered a sex crime in Alaska.
It was not at the time.
That's called harassment.
That's correct. And he was charged. And that's what he was charged with.
It allowed for 2 years. 1 year was ankle monitor at home.
That's correct.
There was another year available that could be given. You suspended that year.
That's correct. Well, yes, I implemented a sentence that was the result of a plea bargain. This plea bargain was not my idea.
Okay, but wait a minute. This is where you lose me. You do have the right to reject the plea bargain. Don't tell me you don't, because you do.
Well, absolutely, and then it goes to the Court of Appeals, and it gets reversed, and it comes right back. What I'd like to know, if somebody disagrees with that, what would be the basis upon which to legitimately reject that plea bargain?
It is outrageous given the nature of the crime.
There's so much wrong with what Judge Corey is saying. And in a case like this, your job should have been to say, I'm horrified that the prosecution dropped some of the important charges here. I'm horrified that my hands are tied with no more than 2 years. And in order for me to do my job, which is to respect the integrity of this woman's life and the horrifying nature of this crime and the public's interest in making sure this doesn't happen again, I have to send a message. And all I have is 2 years maximum to send that message. I'm giving him 2 years, period. That's what you should have done, Judge Corey, and you didn't do.
I understand the narrative that you're putting forward, when you put it that way, sounds horrible, but that comes from a person who just doesn't understand the situation.
If you felt that strongly about it, you could have rejected the plea bargain, correct?
No.
That's a question.
No. The answer is there was no legitimate basis upon which to reject that plea bargain.
And then you put your rubber stamp on it.
No, well, if you want to take the narrative anyway, if you want to choose to define it the way you happen to believe it should be, I'm never going to change your mind.
I'm a defense attorney now. I live for judges who make mistakes or do what you do.
Is it your position and belief, and the position and belief from which you acted, that you did not have the basis to reject this plea bargain?
That's absolutely correct.
Okay, that's what I want to understand. And therefore, you had to accept the plea bargain and implement those terms and conditions.
That's exactly right. And even if
so, this to you is a legislative issue, not a judicial issue. This is the mandate you're given, and if you're going to follow the law, then you did what you had to do.
Exactly.
Okay, and I want people to understand your position, your values, just as a human being, is you believe this was an egregious crime and that this guy was a bad actor.
Absolutely. And in this case, even if individuals were right, even if they think that I could have said, well, you know what, I'm going to reject this. Here's the problem. I reject it, it goes to trial, and this individual never gets more than 2 years, never gets more than 2 years on the crime that the state was pursuing, and never, ever has to be subjected to sex offender conditions of probation. Wouldn't have had probation. This way, the state gets to look at him for 3 additional years, and he has certain compliance issues with sex offender conditions of probation.
Leslie, we have to take a break. Up next, we meet a rape victim and her mother who are still reeling from a judge's sentencing they say is nothing short of an insult. We'll be right back.
The former Niagara Wheatfield High School student who admitted to raping another student back in court.
It was approximately 2 days after the rape when I saw Eli in school. Every day, the bell would ring and we would walk out and he'd just be staring right at me.
The rapist got a timeout and my daughter got a life sentence.
Our top story tonight takes us to the case that led to student protests outside Niagara Wheatfield High School.
19-year-old Elias Dowdy was 3 days from turning 18 when he raped the girl.
The former Niagara Wheatfield High School student who admitted to raping another student back in court. That's where the victim's mother made an emotional plea to the judge.
He has taken away so much for her that she may never get back.
The teenager was placed on 1 year of interim probation.
My client has lived up to the end of his bargain, and if he could take this back, he would.
Well, it's every mother's worst nightmare, finding out that your daughter has been raped. But imagine the horror of having to sit in the same classroom as your rapist and eventually watch him walk out of court with 0 jail time. Take a look.
My daughter Taylor was a junior in high school when the rape occurred. My daughter's rapist's name is Elias Dowdy.
I didn't really know Eli at all before the rape had happened. He invited me to his house after school. I went to Eli's house around 4 or 5 o'clock. I went upstairs to his room. That's when the rape had occurred. I was actually pushing him off of me, fighting him, trying to get him off, yelling no. He just wouldn't listen. I eventually did get out of the room.
Even though Eli was arrested for raping my daughter, he was still allowed to go back to school that fall.
It was approximately 2 days after the rape when I saw Eli in school. Every day, the bell would ring and we would walk out and he'd just be staring right at me.
Taylor was bullied by her peers. One of the students actually took a photo of him and captioned it, "Your boyfriend." I met with the principal. I had a copy of the order of protection, and he told me that Eli was entitled to an education.
I spent all my senior year seeing my rapist every day, and nothing was ever done. It hurt knowing that he was living his best life and I was living in a dark hole. I think they protected Eli because he was a star athlete. It was a little over a year after Eli raped my daughter when he was finally sentenced. The judge gave Eli 1 year interim probation, no prison time, no sex offender registry. How do you rape somebody and just walk away with a slap on the wrist? I want Eli to know that he took something from me that I will never get back.
The rapist got a timeout, and my daughter got a life sentence.
Well, thank you for being here. You say your daughter got a life sentence and the rapist got a timeout here. And the school allowed this young man to walk into the school with your daughter.
Yes, they did. They did.
And they knew what was going on.
I was assured that they were going to keep him away from her all school year, that they were not going to be in close proximity to each other, and that they would protect her. That principal placed her in school suspension to keep her safe. Let's not put the rapist in school suspension. Let's put the victim in, keeping her out of her classes, taking her out of instruction, and letting her sit there all day.
Well, here's an example of a social media post from a relative of Elias Dowdy posted on social media after Dowdy pled guilty to raping Taylor. That girl had the right to say no. It was consensual, but they're making him out to be a monster. All of them people need to take a nosedive off a bridge.
That's a post from social media that I showed the judge.
And at sentencing, the judge said, you need to put a muzzle on your family and friends. You need to tell them the truth, that it wasn't consensual. Quite frankly, if I sentenced you today, I would deny you youthful offender status.
Then why didn't she sentence him that day? I don't understand. I do not understand how the judge could say those words and not just sentence him that day. It doesn't make any sense.
Unless those were the terms of the plea bargain. After he completes this 1 year, and let's say he does it in a satisfactory fashion, then the judge has a discretion to say, you know what? I'm going to treat you as a minor and not as an adult. And if the judge were to do that, it's likely he would not have to register. It might not be what you want, but it is lawful.
We're talking about rapists that get 3 months, no time, walking out, but then these young men of color are in for life. While we're taking a quick break, I want to tell you about a show coming up Thursday. We're talking to a daughter who has really spiraled out of control. I mean, she has become a homeless hoarder. Among other things, she hoards her hair. Now, that is all according to her mother. Take a look.
My 23-year-old daughter, Christy, has unsanitary habits. She refuses to bathe herself or wash her hair. I don't even think she's taken a normal shower since 2016.
You can smell her from 20 feet away. I can't even hug her when I see her. It makes me want to throw up.
She has an obsession with her hair. She collects it. I think she hoards her hair.
I like my hair this way. I like my clothes this way. So it's kind of like, you know, Mom, like, back off a little bit.
So set your DVR because you don't want to miss a bit of that. That's Thursday. Okay, back to this show. Well, I'm having an in-depth discussion today about lenient sentences that some people feel are just discretionary, that judges are giving out because of what their personal values are. I think we're learning a lot about that today. Sometimes things don't happen for the apparent reasons.
What I guess I don't get, Dr. Phil, is why people aren't as upset about the real harsh, severe sentences that are imposed particularly on young men of color, where they're sent away for life, and nobody gets upset.
I pulled a few examples of just exactly that. Michael Fitzgerald Wilson, in 1994, was sentenced to life without parole as a first-time non-violent drug offender in California. 1997, Donald Allen was just 20 years old when he was sentenced to 2 life without parole sentences for conviction on conspiracy and possession charges in Florida. 2 life sentences. 2018, Dayon Davis was sentenced to 5 years in prison and 10 years probation for stealing a pair of black and white Nike Air Jordan 5s from a buddy. The shoes were valued at $180. He's doing 5 years in prison and 10 years probation. These are all young men of color, and what we're talking about here with rapists that get 3 months, no time, walking out, but then these young men of color are in for life. It's outrageous, absolutely outrageous.
And yet,
those are examples of which I could give you 10 more.
Absolutely.
But those are pretty good examples.
Yeah, but we don't hear the public outcry. We don't hear Professor Murphy saying, you know, what's the deal with those judges? Why are these young men being sentenced away?
Don't.
We don't hear that.
Go ahead, Mindy.
I want to be clear. We are on the same page, Judge. I am absolutely speaking out when I see disproportionate numbers of black men behind bars for drug offenses. That is just as offensive, constitutionally and otherwise, as giving no jail time for these horrendous rapists we've been talking about
Judge,
today.
There certainly needs to be an adjustment in the value system, and Taylor is a perfect example of it, letting her perpetrator walk into the school with her, come out of a classroom right across from her. I'm very sorry that you had to contend with that. It's enough to go through what you went through and then have to then contend with that perpetrator again is absolutely unfair to you. It's unfair to you mentally, emotionally, psychologically, behaviorally. It just kind of reopens the wound all over again. Now, we reached out to Niagara Wheatfield High School, the superintendent, Daniel Lelanich, for a statement, but we have not received a comment as of this taping. Okay, imagine the horror. A 16-year-old films a sexual assault, shares it with his friends, adding the caption, "When your first time having sex is rape." That actually happened, and you won't believe what one judge had to say about it. That's next. In the case you're about to see, Judge James Troiano was forced to resign after he made comments in defense of a 16-year-old boy who allegedly raped a near unconscious girl, filmed it, shared it with his buddies with the caption, "When your first time having sex is rape." Take a look.
A New Jersey judge faces calls for his removal amid nationwide outrage over the way he handled a rape case. The alleged assault was captured on cell phone video, but the judge declined prosecutors' request to charge the 16-year-old suspect as an adult, in part because the judge says this teenager came from, in his words, a good family.
Prosecutors said the teen shared video of the alleged incident and texted friends saying when your first time having sex was rape.
Statements like this that favor accused perpetrators really depress victims' willingness to come forward.
Well, I would like to introduce one of the leading criminal defense and trial attorneys in New Jersey, Lee Vartan, who is joining us via Polycom. Lee, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Fell.
Let's talk about this case here because it seems cavalier, it seems reckless, it seems misogynistic. I don't get it.
The judge was not imposing sentence here. What the judge was doing, and this was pursuant to New Jersey statute, was reviewing the decision by the prosecutor whether or not this particular defendant, who happened to be a juvenile, he was 16 at the time, was properly waived to adult criminal court.
Well, let's take a look at what he had to say when he weighed in on that. Quote, "This young man comes from a good family who put him into an excellent school where he was doing extremely well. He is clearly a candidate for not just college, but probably a good college. His scores for college entry were very high. The judge also detailed GMC's extracurricular activities, including being an Eagle Scout.
The judge superseded, essentially, and imposed his view of the world. And not only did he impose his view of the world, but he wasn't really looking at whether the prosecutor abused her discretion, which is what he's supposed to do.
This judge gives judges a bad name. I mean, there's no excuse. He should never be on the bench ever again. This was appalling. And when we get judges like this, should never wear the robe. And I hope never again will.
Yeah, and I just want to say, Judge Corey, this is why you're saying judges shouldn't be injecting themselves or their own thoughts. They just follow the law and keep their opinions to themselves.
Absolutely.
This year's college admissions scandal gave Hollywood actor Felicity Huffman a ton of free publicity for all the wrong reasons. When we come back, we're going to meet a woman who says Huffman's 2-week sentence is a joke compared to the sentencing she received. We'll look at that after the break.
Actress Felicity Huffman gets 14 days in prison and becomes the first parent to face sentencing in the college admissions scandal.
What this story is for so many people is that if you are rich, you don't have to do the time.
Actress Felicity Huffman gets 14 days in prison and becomes the first parent to face sentencing in the college admissions scandal.
Also arrested on the same charges, actress Lori Loughlin and her husband, famed designer Massimo Giannulli. They are among 50 people who are accused of participating in a nationwide conspiracy that allowed their children to get into major colleges illegally.
What are they going to say? We thought this was okay. We thought this is the way you do it. Well, where does that leave middle class and poor people?
What this story is for so many people is that if you are rich, you don't have to do the time.
Well, the college admissions scandal dominated the headlines this year. Stephanie is a current USC student. What's your thought about this?
So I got rejected from USC 2 times, and it wasn't until my 3rd year applying that I finally got accepted. So when I heard about this situation, it was my 1st year attending USC, so it was so frustrating to see somebody else buy their way in when I worked so hard to earn this. And it almost devalues my degree because it takes all of my effort. It feels like it's devalued by someone that just received what I've been working so hard to earn.
My next guest says her criminal past came back to haunt her after social media resurrected her own national news story and compared her to actor Felicity Huffman. Take a look at this.
A Connecticut mother arrested, now facing 20 years in prison. Tanya McDowell uses a friend's address, enrolls her 6-year-old son, AJ, into Brookside Elementary School. She says the Connecticut school district found out and kicked the boy out. But she says her only crime is wanting a better education for her son.
About 9 years ago, my son AJ was excelling at a higher level than the other kids in his class. Innocently, I found a school that was close to my best friend's house, and I used her address to enroll AJ in school. About 6 months later, I got a call from the police. They placed me in handcuffs and told me I was under arrest for stealing an education. I would never have done something like that if I knew it was a crime.
Now, mom is accused of stealing his education, and she's facing serious charges, larceny. She can even be forced to pay $15,000.
The newspaper published a story. About a month after I went to the press, a girl and a guy came up to me asking me where they could find some stuff because they wanted to party. And I gave her the phone number, and they went out and bought some drugs. Because of what I did, I was arrested again, this time for selling narcotics. I strongly believe that the police set me up because I wouldn't stay out of the media. I was charged with larceny and the sale of drugs. I was sentenced to 12 years in prison. When the judge read that sentence, I just felt like the system failed. News reports started to come out comparing my case to Felicity Huffman. She has money and she bribes people. She got days and I got years. It's disgusting.
Please welcome Tanya McDowell and her former attorney, Darnell Crossland. Thank you both for being here. So 14 days versus 12 years, and there were some drug charges involved here. This was a stretch.
Yes, indeed. At that time, she was living at the homeless shelter in Norwalk, and her only concern was taking care of her child. After she got arrested for that, as she explained to you, the setup came. Undercover cops, that is, were coming around the shelter asking her, where can they find this? Like she was a tour guide to the streets. And she came on a lot of scrutiny with these so-called drug charges.
I'm sorry. This is outrageous. You are exactly right. You spent 2 years and 10 months in jail.
Yes, I did.
We fought them tooth and nail, and now it's no longer, it's decriminalized. So if your kid is in a school that the kid doesn't belong in, all you have to do is just enroll the child. The judge ruled that her probation is to be terminated and that the restitution is to be forgiven. So we made some accomplishments.
All right, the nation was shocked this summer when a judge gave 0 jail time to a woman who buried her own baby in her backyard. We'll look at that next. Now, one of the most disturbing crimes of 2019 centered around Brooke Skylar Richardson, who at the age of 17 gave birth to a baby she says was stillborn, and then she buried it in her backyard and received 0 jail time.
Tonight, 18-year-old Skylar Richardson is charged with reckless homicide.
The prosecutor says Brooke Richardson's baby was born alive and that she gave birth in the family home and then killed her baby.
2 days after Skylar Richardson told a gynecologist that she gave birth to a stillborn baby, she was in an interrogation room at the Carlisle Police Department being interviewed by detectives.
Tell us what's going on. I tried to cremate the baby just a little. You tried to cremate the baby?
After getting a tip, investigators found the remains burned and buried behind the family's Carlisle home. The 18-year-old now faces several charges, including aggravated murder.
Skylar Richardson is out of jail tonight.
Skylar was found not guilty of the most serious charge and sentenced to time served for abuse of a corpse.
Richardson got 3 years probation and a stern talking to from Judge Oda.
I know in my heart that if you would have made different decisions, Annabelle would be here today.
Wendy, let me ask you about this case.
To characterize this case as worthy of a slap on the wrist, I think, is dangerous. It's not just insulting as a moral matter, it's dangerous.
It is really inappropriate for us to then say, oh, you know, that was just way out of line. This judge heard everything and gave his reasoning in public. So there's no secret. You can understand what his reasoning and what his thought process was.
It's easy to sit in chairs when you're not in the crucible making the decision. It's quite another when you're actually there in the gravity of the moment and you have to make the call.
There's no question about that, and people don't have all the facts that are in court, and sometimes the jury doesn't have all the facts that the rest of the world does.
That's true.
That's a two-way street, my friend.
Yes, sir.
I want to thank all of my guests today. A special thanks to former District Attorney Michael Kraut, former Superior Court Judge Michael Corey, Judge Cordell, thank you so much for being here as well. Attorney Wendy Murphy, thank you so much for being here. Darnell, thank you for being here. We really appreciate you coming and weighing in on this. For more information about today's show, we want you to log on to drphil.com. You can check me out on my social media where we're going to be discussing this. I saw something on my Instagram the other day that made me smile. Princess Charlotte says, Dr. Phil, you'd make a great judge. Just saying. No, I'll leave that to the others, but thanks for your comment. We'll see you next time.